At 19, she was forced to wed the most feared Alpha King, all to save her pack from ruin. She was only 19, yet the weight of her pack's survival rested entirely on her shoulders. Her parents had looked at her with pleading eyes that morning, their faces lined with fear and exhaustion. There had been no other choice. The pact was clear, her hand in marriage to Kale, the most feared Alpha King in all the lands, and her pack would be spared ruin. The thought of Kale filled her with dread. Stories of his cruelty and unyielding rule had spread across the kingdoms like wildfire. Even the bravest of warriors trembled at the mention of his name. Yet she had been told that to survive, she must marry him, and for her people, survival was everything. Her journey to the citadel was long and filled with unease. Wolves prowled the dark woods at the edge of the road, their eyes glinting like shards of moonlight. Alara felt their presence but did not flinch. She could not afford fear, not now. Her mind replayed the council meeting where the decision had been made. The elders had argued endlessly, and in the end there had been only one solution. Her pack would continue to exist, but she would become the price. When she finally saw the citadel, rising against the dark sky like a jagged crown, her breath caught. The walls were high and black, with spires reaching toward the clouds. Flames flickered from the battlements, casting long shadows that twisted and danced across the stone. It was a place built to inspire awe and fear at once, a place built for a king like Kale. The gates opened before she could even knock, and a tall figure emerged, draped in a cloak as dark as midnight. Kale himself, his presence commanding the air around him. His eyes, sharp and calculating, met hers, and for the first time Alara felt the stories were true, but incomplete. There was power there, yes, but also something else, an intensity that made her heart twist in ways she didn't understand. "Welcome, Alara," he said, his voice low and steady, each word deliberate. "I hope you are prepared for what lies ahead." I am," she replied, though her voice sounded fragile even to her own ears. She did not bow, did not kneel. She had been raised to respect authority, but she was not a servant. Kale's eyes narrowed, a faint smirk playing on his lips, and for a moment he seemed intrigued. "You are brave," he said simply. Then, without waiting for further words, he gestured, and a guard led her through the massive gates into the citadel. The halls were vast and echoing, lit by torches that cast flickering shadows. Tapestries of battles long past hung along the walls, and suits of armor gleamed in the dim light. The air smelled of iron and burning wood, of power and history. Alara could feel it pressing on her, a weight of centuries of rule and command. She walked carefully, trying not to show the trembling of her hands. They stopped before a massive door, intricately carved with scenes of kings and wolves, intertwined in ways that suggested loyalty, dominance, and sacrifice. Kale opened it, and Alara stepped inside, finding herself in a room that was both lavish and austere. A large bed, finely made, dominated one corner, but it was the view from the windows that held her attention, moonlight spilling across a courtyard where statues of wolves seemed almost alive. Kale watched her carefully. "This will be your home now," he said. "For as long as our pact requires," Alara nodded. "I will do what I must." She hated the words, hated how easily they sounded like surrender, but she had no choice. Not for herself, for her pack. The days that followed were a mixture of tension, learning, and silent observation. Kale was a demanding presence, yet not without fairness. He taught her the rules of the court, the expectations of an alpha king, and the dangers that surrounded them. Alara quickly realized that fear was not the only tool Kale wielded. He commanded respect, not just with his strength but with his mind, his precision, and his ability to see truths others tried to hide. Despite herself, Alara found moments when Kale's sternness softened. Small gestures, a hand offered to steady her when she stumbled, a rare smile when she completed a difficult task, made her heart race in ways she did not understand. But she refused to allow herself to be drawn in. This was politics, survival, and nothing more. One evening, as the moon rose high and silver light spilled into the halls, Kale summoned her to the courtyard. The air was cool, filled with the scent of pine and wet stone. Wolves padded silently around them, their eyes glinting in the moonlight. "You are learning quickly," Kale said, his tone unusually calm. "But do you understand why we are here, why this union exists?" "I do," Alara replied, "to save my pack." He studied her for a long moment. "And what of yourself? Where do you stand, Alara?" Her stomach twisted. She had not expected this question, not so directly, not in a voice that was so gentle yet heavy with weight. I stand with my pack," she said finally, though her voice faltered. The truth was more complicated. She felt the pull of something she could not name, a strange longing she did not yet dare acknowledge. Kale stepped closer, his eyes catching the moonlight in a way that made them seem almost alive. "Power comes with sacrifice," he said softly. "And sometimes it comes with choices you do not wish to make." Before she could answer, a howl echoed through the night, sharp and sudden, a warning from the border of the kingdom. Kale's expression hardened instantly, his training, his instincts as an alpha king taking over. "Trouble," he said simply, "and you are coming with me." Alara followed without hesitation, adrenaline surging. They moved through the courtyard with silent precision, the wolves at their sides like shadows. As they approached the source of the disturbance, she realized that this was no ordinary patrol. It was a test, a glimpse into Kale's world, where every action, every choice could mean life or death. The threat revealed itself in a flash of movement, a lone wolf, twisted by dark magic, snarling and snapping as it lunged toward Kale. Alara froze for a moment, fear and awe mingling inside her, and then instinct took over. She leapt forward, distracting the creature long enough for Kale to strike with deadly precision. Afterward, the courtyard was silent except for their heavy breaths. Kale's eyes found hers, and for a heartbeat, the world seemed to stop. "You are braver than I expected," he said, not as a command but as a statement. Alara's heart hammered. "I have to be," she whispered, "for them, for my pack." Kale's gaze softened just slightly before the mask of the alpha returned. "Do not forget," he said, voice low. "Bravery alone will not be enough. You must learn to see the world as it truly is." That night, as Alara lay in the unfamiliar bed, the moonlight spilling across the room, she could not sleep. Her mind replayed every glance, every word, every shadow she had seen in Kale's eyes. There was danger, yes, but also something else, something she could not yet name, and somewhere deep within her, a small, fragile spark of curiosity flickered to life, a spark that would not be easily extinguished, because Kale was not just the Alpha King feared by all. He was a man burdened by shadows, a force of nature shaped by choices and curses, and Alara had just stepped into the storm. And storms, she knew, were never gentle. Cliffhanger, from the tower above, a figure cloaked in black watched the courtyard, eyes gleaming with malicious intent. The night was far from over, and Alara's first test had only just begun. The morning after the attack, the citadel seemed quieter than usual. The sun rose weakly through gray clouds, casting long, pale shadows across the stone walls. Alara moved through the halls, her steps light but steady. She felt the eyes of the guards and servants on her, some wary, others curious. They had heard the tales of Kale's feared wrath and the unexpected bravery of the girl who had survived the first night. Alara's thoughts, however, were elsewhere, on Kale. That night in the courtyard had been a revelation. For the first time, she saw the man beneath the king, a flicker of vulnerability hidden beneath his armor of control. He had saved her without hesitation, yet there had been a flicker of something more in his gaze, a weight of unspoken emotion, or perhaps warning. She did not yet know. The day began with lessons in strategy, politics, and survival. Kale moved beside her like a shadow, guiding her through the intricacies of court life. Ilara struggled to keep up, her mind half on the lessons and half on understanding the man who dominated them all. Kale's presence was suffocating at times, yet magnetic. She felt her pulse quicken at the smallest of gestures, a glance, a pause, a rare hint of approval. "You must always think 3 steps ahead," Kale instructed, pointing to a map spread across a massive table. "Every move you make, every word you speak will have consequences. In this kingdom, hesitation can mean death." "I understand," Ilara replied, tracing her finger over the borders of the map. "I'll do my best." Kale watched her for a long moment, his dark eyes unreadable. "Bravery without understanding is useless," he said finally. "Do not let courage blind you to danger." Ilara nodded, but her mind wandered. The encounter with the twisted wolf haunted her thoughts. That creature, corrupted by magic, had been more than a simple enemy. She had felt its rage, its pain, and its hunger. And she had felt something else, an unnatural darkness, a force she could not name. Kale seemed to notice her distraction. "You are thinking of the wolf," he said quietly, leaning closer. "Do you understand what you faced?" "Yes," she whispered, though her voice lacked certainty. It felt wrong, not natural. Kale's gaze softened, and for a moment he allowed her a glimpse of the man beneath the alpha. "It is the mark of dark magic," he said. "Something is stirring beyond these walls, and it will reach us if we are not careful." Ilara swallowed, feeling a shiver run down her spine. She had thought her first night was the worst of it, but she could sense that this was only the beginning. The day passed with lessons and cautious observation, but the evening brought a challenge she had not expected. Kale summoned her to the training grounds, where the twilight cast long shadows across the stone and grass. Wolves moved silently around them, their presence both comforting and unnerving. "You must learn to defend yourself," Kale said, unsheathing a sword with a fluid motion. "Bravery alone will not protect you. You must be prepared to act when danger comes." Ilara felt the weight of the weapon in her hands. She had practiced with her pack, yes, but this was different. Kale's training was precise, demanding, and unyielding. Every movement had purpose, every strike a lesson. As they trained, she noticed how Kale's eyes studied her, constantly, carefully. He corrected her stance, guided her movements, and yet there was a subtle gentleness in his touch that made her pulse quicken. She hated that she noticed. She hated that she wanted it. Hours passed, and the sky darkened into a deep indigo. They stopped only when the wolves themselves curled at their feet, sensing the calm before the storm. Kale stood close, breathing heavily, and for a moment the world seemed to shrink around them. "You are stronger than I expected," he said, voice low, almost a whisper. "Do not mistake it for skill alone. Your heart is untrained. That will be your greatest challenge." Ilara looked into his eyes, searching for the meaning behind his words. "My heart?" she asked, her voice barely audible. Kale's gaze did not waver. "Do not let it betray you," he said simply. Then he turned and walked away, leaving her alone with the fading light and the pounding of her own heart. That night, sleep eluded her. Ilara wandered the halls, the torchlight casting long shadows that flickered like living things. She found herself drawn to the tower where she had first glimpsed Kale's darkness. The wind whipped around her, carrying the scent of pine and rain. She could hear the distant howl of wolves, a reminder of the wildness she had left behind, and yet she felt a strange connection to this place, to the man who ruled it. Suddenly, a shadow moved at the edge of the corridor. Ilara's heart skipped a beat. She had been warned to trust no one fully within the walls, and yet she stepped forward. "Who's there?" she called, her voice steady despite the fear rising inside her. The figure stepped into the torchlight. It was Kale. His dark cloak swirled around him, and his expression was unreadable. "You should not be wandering alone," he said, his voice low, filled with both warning and concern. "I could say the same to you," Ilara replied, trying to mask the tremor in her voice. Kale's gaze softened for a moment, and then the mask returned. "The difference is that I know the dangers here," he said. "You do not, yet you face them anyway." Alara felt a flush rise to her cheeks. "I am learning," she said simply, and the words were half a challenge, half a plea for understanding. Kale studied her silently, as if weighing her spirit against the weight of the world. Finally, he spoke. "There is more at work than you realize," he said. "Not all threats come from outside. Some are born from choices, from power, from shadows within ourselves, and those are the most dangerous of all." Alara shivered, understanding the gravity of his words. She had sensed the darkness in Kale, glimpsed it in his eyes, felt it in the air around him. And now she knew this was not just about survival or politics. It was about navigating a world where hearts, power, and danger intertwined. The next days brought more training, more lessons, and small moments that left her both unsettled and intrigued. Kale allowed her glimpses of kindness, a hand to steady her when she stumbled, a rare smile when she succeeded, a word of praise that felt like a secret gift. Yet he remained distant, always observing, always testing, always reminding her of the fragile line between courage and recklessness. One evening, Kale led her to the library, a vast hall filled with ancient tomes and the scent of old paper. "You must understand history," he said. "To rule, to survive, to protect, you must know what has come before." Alara ran her fingers over the leather-bound books, feeling the weight of knowledge and time. "There is so much," she murmured. "Yes," Kale replied, his voice almost gentle. "And yet knowing is only the beginning. Understanding is harder, and even understanding cannot always save you from the choices you must make." As the days passed, Alara began to notice the cracks in Kale's armor. There were moments when his eyes darkened with pain, when his jaw tightened as if holding back a storm, when his hands shook slightly after making a difficult decision. She began to sense the curse that lingered around him, an invisible weight that neither strength nor fear could fully mask. It was during one quiet night, as they stood together in the courtyard watching the moonlight spill across the stone, that Kale finally spoke of it. "There is a darkness in me," he said softly, "a curse born of choices I made long before you were born. It shapes me, binds me, controls me, and it is why I cannot allow myself to be fully close to anyone." Alara's heart ached at the truth in his voice. She had felt it, this invisible barrier, the shadow that kept him distant even when he was near. "But you trust me," she said quietly. "You let me learn, let me see you." Kale's gaze met hers, unguarded for a heartbeat. "Trust is different from love," he said. "And love could destroy us both." Alara swallowed hard, understanding more than she wished. "Then why let me stay?" she asked. "Because even in the darkness we must face the world," Kale said. "And sometimes, the one who stands with you is the only light you will ever have." The words hung between them, fragile and impossible, like a candle flickering in a storm. Alara wanted to reach out, to touch him, to bridge the space between fear and desire. Yet she hesitated, knowing that the walls around his heart were stronger than any sword. Suddenly, the howl of wolves shattered the quiet. Shadows moved along the edge of the forest, faster, closer, darker than before. Kale's eyes narrowed and he stepped in front of her, protective, commanding. "Prepare yourself," he said, his voice sharp, carrying the weight of authority. "The darkness is coming, and this time it will not be alone." Alara's pulse raced. She felt fear, yes, but also a strange thrill, a sense that the bond between them, fragile though it was, might be the only thing strong enough to withstand what was coming. And as they stood together in the moonlit courtyard, wolves circling, shadows shifting, she realized the truth. Survival would demand courage, strategy, and sacrifice. But it might also demand the courage to face the shadows of the heart, both hers and Kale's. Cliffhanger, a figure cloaked in black, watched from the forest's edge, eyes glowing unnaturally in the moonlight. They whispered words of power, a promise that the darkness was far from finished, and that Alara's trials were only beginning. The dawn was pale, brushing the citadel walls with a muted gold, but the air felt heavy with unseen tension. Alara stood at the edge of the training courtyard, her fingers brushing the hilt of her sword as she waited. Her thoughts, as always, were tangled in Kale. He had grown quieter in recent days, brooding in shadows, speaking only when necessary. Yet when he did, the weight of his words pressed upon her heart, making her ache with a longing she barely understood. She remembered his confession under the moonlight, that he bore a curse, one that bound him to his power and kept him from love. The idea had shaken her at first. How could a man so strong, so feared, carry such a burden? And yet the truth of it had been undeniable. She had seen the flicker of pain in his eyes, the tension in his hands, the restraint in his voice. Kale appeared at the far end of the courtyard, his cloak flowing behind him like shadowed water. He moved with the same quiet authority that had haunted her from the beginning, yet now there was a different edge to him, sharper, more urgent. "Today," he said, his voice low and commanding, "we train not with swords but with minds. Strategy will save lives as much as strength." Alara nodded, gripping her sword tighter. She had grown stronger over the past days, learning not only to defend herself but to anticipate the dangers lurking around them. Yet today, she sensed, would be a lesson of a different sort, one she could not prepare for. Kale led her through a series of exercises designed to test patience, insight, and judgment. He posed hypothetical attacks, political schemes, and difficult choices, watching her reaction, measuring her instinct against the weight of consequence. "You hesitate," he said at one point, his sharp eyes catching hers. "Do you value your life over the lives of your pack?" I think of them," Alara said, her voice steady despite the pounding of her heart. "Always." "Good," Kale said, though his expression remained unreadable. "But courage alone cannot protect them. You must learn to act when your heart tells you no and when your mind whispers yes." Alara followed him, her thoughts spinning. Kale's lessons were always layered, never simple. It was as if he were teaching her not only to survive the world but to survive him, this enigma of a man who held both danger and desire in equal measure. As the day wore on, Kale's demeanor softened slightly, though never entirely. He allowed her small victories, acknowledged her insight, and even offered fleeting encouragement. And in those moments, Alara felt something dangerous: hope, warmth, connection. She tried to push it away, reminding herself of the reason she was here. Yet it lingered, like sunlight breaking through clouds in a storm. That evening, as the citadel settled into quiet, Kale approached her with a serious expression. "There is something you must see," he said, motioning for her to follow. They moved through hidden corridors, twisting staircases, and narrow passages until they reached a chamber she had never entered before. It was small, almost claustrophobic, lined with books, scrolls, and ancient artifacts. The air was thick with the scent of old parchment and faint, lingering incense. "This is where I keep the history of my family, my kingdom, and my curse," Kale said, his voice quieter now, almost hesitant. Alara's curiosity surged. "Your curse?" she asked, stepping closer. Kale nodded, moving to a pedestal where a single dark crystal pulsed faintly, like it held a heartbeat of its own. "This is the source," he said. "A choice I made centuries ago to gain power for my people, but it came at a cost. My heart is bound, my emotions shackled. To love freely could destroy everything I hold dear." Alara stared at the crystal, feeling an unexpected tremor of fear and awe. She had heard of curses and dark magic, but this was different. It was living, breathing, tangible. And Kale, standing beside it, watching her with those dark, intense eyes, was part of it, trapped within its invisible chains. "Then why let me see this?" she whispered. "Because you are no ordinary girl," Kale said. "And because the darkness coming will require trust, trust that I am capable of protecting you, even if I cannot protect myself." Alara felt a shiver run down her spine. The bond between them, fragile as it was, seemed to deepen in that moment. She wanted to speak, to offer words of comfort, but none came. Instead, she reached out, hesitated, and let her fingers brush the edge of the crystal. A pulse ran through her hand and she gasped, not from pain but from the raw intensity of its power. Kale watched silently. "Do not fear it," he said. "Fear is the mind's prison. The heart is the real challenge." Before she could respond, a commotion erupted outside. The howl of wolves, frantic and sharp, echoed through the citadel. Kale's posture stiffened immediately, instincts kicking in. "Trouble," he said grimly, "and it is closer than we feared." They raced through the corridors, emerging into the courtyard where shadows moved unnaturally among the trees. Figures cloaked in black, eyes glowing faintly, advanced toward them. Magic crackled in the air, thick and oppressive, bending the wind and the shadows. Kale moved to stand in front of Alara, protective, commanding. "Stay close," he ordered. "Do not underestimate them. They are not ordinary." Alara's heart pounded, but she did not hesitate. She drew her sword, feeling its weight and balance. Fear still lingered, but it was tempered now by resolve. She would not be a pawn. She would fight. The figures lunged, and Kale's movements became a blur of precision and power. His sword cut through the air, each strike measured, controlled, deadly. Alara followed his lead, blocking, striking, and dodging. The creatures advanced with unnatural speed, their magic twisting the night, but together they moved as one, Kale and Alara, a partnership forged in danger and trust. For a brief moment, Alara caught a glimpse of the man beneath the king. The intensity in his eyes, the strength in his movements, and the protective stance he took beside her. It was as if he were more than just Kale, the feared Alpha King. He was a man who carried his burden alone, yet still fought to protect those he cared for. The battle ended as quickly as it began. The creatures fell back, retreating into the forest, leaving behind a silence that was almost deafening. Alara's chest heaved, sweat and adrenaline mingling on her skin. She looked at Kale and for the first time truly saw him, not just as a king or a warrior, but as a man weighed down by choices, by duty, by a curse he could not escape. Kale's gaze met hers, dark and unreadable. "You did well," he said, voice low, almost a whisper. "Bravery alone would not have saved you, but your mind, your instincts, they kept you alive." Alara felt a warmth spread through her chest, and she realized with a jolt of both fear and longing that she had come to trust him. Not just as a leader, not just as a king, but as someone whose presence grounded her, whose strength gave her courage. Yet the shadow of the curse still lingered, an invisible barrier between them. Kale's eyes darkened once more, a reminder that his heart was not his own, that love could be dangerous, even fatal. She swallowed hard, knowing the truth she dared not speak. She was drawn to him, and he was drawn to her, yet the forces that bound him might keep them apart forever. That night, as the citadel slept under a blanket of stars, Alara stood at the tower window, looking out toward the forest. Wolves prowled silently below, and the memory of the attack lingered in her mind. She knew the danger was far from over. The cloaked figures had not acted alone, and the magic that had driven them was growing stronger. Kale appeared beside her, silent and imposing. For a moment, neither spoke. The wind carried the scent of pine, rain, and distant danger. "You cannot face them alone," he said finally, his voice soft but firm, "and I cannot protect you if you remain uncertain." "I am not uncertain," Alara replied, her voice trembling slightly, though she would not show fear. I want to help. I want to stand with you." Kale studied her, the flicker of something, hope perhaps, or longing passing through his eyes. "And yet," he said, "even standing together, there are forces we may not survive. My curse, my choices, they affect us both. You must understand that." Alara met his gaze steadily. "I understand," she said, though the truth was that she only understood part of it, but she would learn. She would face whatever came beside him, not behind him. Kale's expression softened slightly, though the shadows never fully left his eyes. "Then we prepare," he said. "And when the darkness comes, we face it together." And as they stood together, the night stretching endlessly around them, Alara realized something terrifying and beautiful. Survival would demand courage, strategy, and sacrifice, but it would also demand the courage to face the heart's reckoning. Cliffhanger. From the forest beyond the citadel, the cloaked figures whispered in unison, weaving a spell that pulsed with dark power. They knew Kale's curse and Alara's growing bond, and they would strike where the heart was most vulnerable. The citadel shivered under the weight of the storm. Clouds rolled across the sky, dark and heavy, and rain hammered against the high towers like a warning. Alara stood at the edge of the courtyard, her cloak clinging to her as wind tore through the stone walls. Beside her, Kale's presence was steady, unwavering, a pillar in the chaos. His dark eyes scanned the forest beyond, alert for the threat that had been building for days. "The cloaked ones are coming," Kale said, his voice low, threaded with steel. "They know your strength and they seek to turn it against me." Alara tightened her grip on her sword. "Then we will face them together," she said, her voice firm. "I will not let them harm you or my pack." Kale's expression softened, but only slightly. "You must understand," he said, "that this fight will not only test your skill, it will test your heart." Alara's pulse quickened. She had felt it, the pull of something deeper, something dangerous yet irresistible between them. And now, as the wind howled around them and the rain drummed a relentless rhythm, she realized that courage alone was not enough. Trust was required. Hope was required. And love, perhaps even love. The first figures emerged from the forest, cloaked in black, moving with unnatural silence. Their eyes glowed faintly, eerie and cold. Magic hummed in the air, twisting shadows, bending the rain and turning the storm into a weapon. Kale stepped forward, placing himself in front of Alara. Wolves circled them, their teeth bared and their eyes glowing in response to the threat. "Stay close," Kale commanded, his voice resonating over the storm, "and fight with everything you have." Alara nodded, feeling a strange calm settle over her despite the danger. She had trained, learned, and survived, but now she realized that her strength alone would not be enough. Together, she and Kale would need to be a force greater than fear itself. The battle began. Cloaked figures lunged from the shadows, their magic crackling through the air. Kale moved like a shadow himself, swift, precise, and deadly. Each strike of his sword was measured, powerful, and protective. Alara followed, dodging, striking, and countering, her movements guided by both instinct and the lessons Kale had taught her. For a moment, time seemed suspended. The storm, the magic, the rain, they all melted into a single pulse of danger and motion. Kale's eyes met hers during the fight, and for a heartbeat, the world narrowed to only the two of them. She saw the weight he carried, the curse that bound him, and yet the determination that refused to break. "You are stronger than I imagined," Kale said, his voice carried on the wind as he parried another attack. "Do not hold back, not for fear, not for caution." Alara felt the words in her bones. She had grown since the first night, grown from a scared, uncertain girl into someone capable, someone fierce, someone willing to fight not just for survival but for what she loved. And in that moment she realized she had come to love Kale, and she could not deny it any longer. The battle raged, and the cloaked figures began to retreat into the forest. Kale's eyes narrowed as he sensed their magic weakening. But just as relief began to wash over him, a figure stepped forward, a sorcerer, tall and menacing, eyes burning with dark fire. "This ends now," the sorcerer hissed, raising his hands. Magic surged around him, twisting the wind and rain into jagged shards of energy. "The Alpha King cannot protect her. She is mine." Kale stepped forward, shielded by the wolves, his sword ready. "Not if I can stop you," he said, voice steady, commanding, unyielding. Alara felt fear rise, but she did not falter. "We stand together," she said, her voice loud and clear. "You will not take me, or anyone I care for, without a fight." The sorcerer laughed, a chilling sound that mingled with the storm. "Then face me, little wolf," he said, and the ground shook as he unleashed his magic. Kale moved like a storm himself, his sword striking with power and precision. Magic collided with steel and the air sizzled with energy. Alara fought beside him, using both her sword and her mind, anticipating moves, guiding the wolves and protecting the weak points in their defense. For a moment, it seemed impossible. The sorcerer's power was immense, fueled by ancient spells and dark intent. But Kale's determination did not waver, and Alara's courage burned brighter than any fear. Together they became a force of light and shadow intertwined, each movement in harmony, each strike echoing trust and connection. Then, as the sorcerer's spell reached its peak, Kale made a decision. He stepped into the heart of the storm of magic, his eyes meeting Alara's. "Trust me," he said. Alara's chest tightened. She did trust him more than anyone, more than herself. She nodded, and in that moment she felt a surge of power, not from magic, but from the bond they shared. Together they moved, their actions synchronized, their hearts beating as one. Kale's sword struck true, shattering the sorcerer's magic, and the storm collapsed in on itself. The cloaked figures fled into the forest, leaving the battlefield silent except for the sound of rain and the soft panting of wolves. Kale stood beside Alara, soaked, weary but victorious. He looked at her, eyes dark with emotion, and for the first time the barrier between them seemed to waver. "You are incredible," he said softly, his voice raw with feeling. "I underestimated you, and yet you proved yourself stronger than even I imagined." Alara felt her heart swell. "We proved ourselves together," she said, her voice shaking with emotion. I could not have done it alone." Kale's gaze softened, and for a moment the weight of centuries of curses, of fear, seemed to lift. He reached out, gently brushing a strand of wet hair from her face. "Alara," he whispered, "you are more than I ever expected." His voice faltered, the words heavy with the truth he had held back for so long. Alara's breath caught. "Kale," she began, but he silenced her with a gentle hand on her shoulder. "No words," he said. "Not yet, just stay with me, here now in this moment." They stood together, the storm fading, the citadel quiet except for the soft rhythm of rain and heartbeats. Alara realized that their bond had transformed in the fire of battle, from fear to trust, from duty to choice, from survival to love. But the victory was not without cost. Kale's curse was not fully broken. It lingered, a shadow that reminded them both that their journey was not complete. And yet, they faced it together, not as king and pawn, but as equals, bound by choice, courage, and a connection deeper than either had known possible. The next morning, the citadel awakened to calm skies and sunlight breaking through the clouds. The aftermath of battle was quiet but unmistakable. Damage to the walls, signs of magic lingering in the air, and the watchful eyes of wolves patrolling the grounds. Alara walked beside Kale through the courtyard, her sword sheathed, her cloak damp but her spirit unbroken. She had faced fear, darkness, and the unknown, and she had emerged stronger, braver, and more certain of her heart than ever before. Kale's hand brushed hers, a subtle touch, but it carried weight, warmth, and reassurance. "You have changed everything," he said, voice low, "not just for yourself, but for all of us. You are extraordinary." Alara smiled softly, feeling a rush of emotion. "And you," she said, meeting his gaze, "are more than the stories say. You are real and flawed and human, and I am glad I see it." Kale's eyes darkened, but this time not with fear or control, but with something tender, something unspoken yet understood. He reached for her hand, holding it firmly, and for the first time the curse did not feel like a barrier between them. It felt like a shadow that could be faced together. And as they stood in the sunlight, the citadel behind them, the wolves at their sides, and the memory of darkness fading into the past, Alara realized a truth she had long denied. Survival, courage, and even love were worth every risk, every choice, every moment of fear. Because together she and Kale could face the storms, inside and out. Together they could turn darkness into strength. And together they could shape a future not defined by fear but by love, trust, and courage. The wind shifted, carrying the scent of pine and rain. Somewhere in the distance, a wolf howled, a reminder that the wild and untamed world still awaited. But for now, they stood together, hearts aligned, ready to face whatever came next. The curse may linger, the shadows may return, but the bond between them, forged in trial, trust, and battle, was unbreakable. And in the quiet of the citadel, with sunlight glimmering on stone and silver fur, a new chapter began, one of hope, redemption, and a love that neither magic nor fear could destroy. Final hook. As they turned to walk toward the citadel gates, Kale paused, sensing movement on the horizon. Dark clouds swirled in the distance, hinting that the world was never truly safe. But now they would face it together, stronger, wiser, and unafraid.